So, Chris Kaba is dead, and nothing's going to bring him back. But this row over how he was killed clearly hasn't been laid to rest by this verdict from the jury yesterday. And both sides seem to be really digging in now and facing each other across this chasm of disagreement. Nels, where do you stand on this?
So we have... By nature, we have to respect the decision of the jury. That's the right thing to do. They heard the details, they heard the facts. I have many concerns about procedure of police in this situation, particularly around the hard stop. The hard stop is when the police pretty much chase a car and actually box it in order to get the person out. I have been in one of those stops before, and I can tell you that it's actually quite a scary experience. Actually, it's one of the most frightening things I've ever been through. So that's...
Sorry, why were you in a hard stop?
To this very day, I have no idea. I was coming back from an examination while I was at university, me and a couple of friends of ours, a couple of friends of mine, still my friends this very day, and then suddenly we found ourselves surrounded by police cars and then we're dragged out on the floor. We have no idea, there's no apology, no information, no nothing to this very day.
Mistaken identity?
We don't have a clue to this very day. This was in the early noughties. As you can tell, I've got a little bit of grey hairs, right? That's university was a long time ago. But so that is a very, very intimidating experience, but also, too, it's an experience that often leaves you open to a lot of confusion. So there's the... Please, for you.
No, I'm just listening to what you're saying, and I just wonder if when you say it can lead you to a lot of confusion, can you just go into a little bit more detail about what happened to you and just the feelings that you will be feeling when you're in the car?
So you're in the car, I wasn't the driver on the day, and so I had no awareness of what was actually happening. So the driver would be doing the whole looking at the mirrors and, of course, looking around and everything. I was doing none of that. I was just there, and we were just coming from an examination, and then bingo, from completely nowhere, we were just stormed by police, and before you know it or so, we're out of the car, on the ground, you name it or so, and that was pretty much it. But the issue is this, is that in that moment, because in that moment, it's a moment of high confusion for you on the receiving end of the hard stop. So who's actually surrounding you, what their motivations are, so it's all really, really happening in quick
yes, but come
succession.
on, the difference surely here is that Kaba was driving a car that was directly associated with a shooting that had taken place the night before.
But did he know that?
Well, he knew, according to the police tapes that were played to the jury, that he was being followed. He was on the phone to a friend and he was saying, the police are following me, and he discontinued the call. So it didn't come as a shock that it was a hard stop because he knew he was being followed. And unlike you, he tried to break out of it. So, I mean, there's a parallel and there's not a parallel, isn't there?
There is indeed, but I must say this too at the exact same time. So thinking about this more broadly in terms of police procedure, I would like to highlight the name Reid Wiscusson. I hope I pronounced that right. He's a 32-year-old man from Somerset. The police went into his house and found, quite literally, an arsenal of guns there. And they found an arsenal of guns, and then one particular point he went into I believe it was the bathroom, and he shot himself. And then the police... And then
fatally?
No. To the point where then the police stormed back and then withdrew for a second, and then he then came out of the bathroom, I believe it was the bathroom, I hope I'm correct, with a gun aimed at the police. The police shot him. The gentleman is serving a 37-year prison sentence today. So they took him, quite literally, safely in. The point I'm making is this, is that it is very, very possible, as it was possible in the case of Chris Kaba, for them to actually get Chris Kaba out of there alive, alive as he should have been to this very day, to this very moment. And so that's where we're very, very concerned about this, because when we look at the differences between Reid Wiscusson, who presented a significantly greater threat to the police, he literally had a gun aimed at them, had already discharged the gun. They knew that he was actually somebody who had violent intent from how they were monitoring him online, amongst other things. So they even found a police body armour on him, which they couldn't understand, amongst an arsenal of guns. But for some bizarre reason, he gets out of it alive, whereas the likes of Chris Kaba's, time and time again, are not.
When you say the likes of Chris Kaba, what do you mean?
I mean that, so there's a running theme in which I'm afraid to say men who look like myself.
You mean
also,
black men?
Black men, also, but men who look like myself, black men, particularly working-class black men, find themselves in these very, very increasingly difficult situations with the police, sometimes fatal, sometimes not. And I must say this too, that we are grateful for what the police do, but subject to who you are in Britain, you are going to have a very different experience of policing.
Are you saying, let's cut to the chase,
Please.
Are you saying that if he hadn't been black, he wouldn't have been shot?
I'm saying that had he have not been black, I think there would have been a significantly decreased likelihood of it happening. Now, but that doesn't come out of the clear blue sky. The police, like all of us, are subject to our products of our environment. So if you are fed a steady diet of a particular type of imagery, and also, of course, there was the additional baggage in this case too, which was the car was apparently used in some sort of shooting the day before, so which probably gives them a heightened situation. But there's so many different things that when you have those sorts of interactions with police, it's very different depending on who you are. But if you're black or a black man in particular, so I mean, even black women too, or even somebody who's actually just related to a black person. I know, say, white women who's dating black men, and then suddenly they get stopped and searched because the police see them dropping their keys off.
All right.
So, but I must be clear here that it's that the level of charm or level of courtesy or the level of protection that you're going to receive from the police is very reflective of who you are.
Let's come to Andrew then, who's listened to this. The case against all that would be that there were question marks over this shooting, and that's why it went to trial. There was a charge, there was a full Crown Court hearing, a full jury listening to it, video evidence and all the rest of it, and they came to their decision after 3 hours of deliberation. In your eyes, Andrew, is that sufficient case to argue against what Nels is saying?
Yeah, and I've listened very carefully to what Nels is saying, and a young black man who's been... That was a terrible experience, must be appalling, and we've heard those stories before. We know that the Metropolitan Police has been accused of being institutionally racist, and that's terrible. But in this particular case, a jury heard the evidence. They were in that court for 3 weeks, day in, day out. I wasn't. But what one of the family will say Chris Kaba was unarmed. The police would say he was armed. He was behind the wheel of a car, which he was using as a battering ram, and that police officer made a split-second decision because he thought his fellow officers were at risk from this guy driving the car. They didn't know if he was armed either. He wasn't, as it happened, in the sense he didn't have a gun, but this police vehicle had been used... the vehicle had been used in a shooting the day before, so there might have been an assumption that there was the person driving the car had a gun. But the fact he was using the car as a battering ram, I think, persuaded the jury that the police officer decided they were at risk.
We've had a...
Sorry, can I just say one thing? I must... But of course, I appreciate your words, Andrew. But the idea of the split-second decision is one that I must really and truly challenge. Because that might be the tip of the iceberg. What you're seeing on that split-second decision is a lifetime of biases that have been fed into us, fed into all of us. But in addition to that, too, the split-second decision doesn't just go the one way. Because it's, again, depending on who you are, is a reflection of the sort of what you expect from the police. So when you see someone like Chris Kaba behind the actual wheel there, he too is effectively making a split-second decision.
Well, what do you make of this then, Nels? I want to read this to you.
Please.
This has come in from someone called Davina on email. She says, I'm a black migrant to the UK, and I tell my children a golden rule of survival. If an armed police officer tells you to do something, you do exactly what he or she tells you, no question. Chris Kaba didn't have that advice. And the body cam footage made it very easy for the jury to come to their verdict. She means the way he was using the car as a battering ram. I don't think, and this is a black woman, I don't think race had anything to do with it.
Well, that's the situation, and I mean, we've heard the term race has nothing to do with it, so we've heard that no matter the atrocity as far as being related to black people concerned, it's a common theme. So I'm not worried about that the slightest bit or so. But I think that what we're dealing with here is that the key thing that we need to do is make sure we're looking at problem solution control. We're looking at the systems and the actual systems and controls within the police service to make sure that the likelihood of this sort of situation doesn't happen again. And by that, I don't mean not holding police accountable. I mean that we're looking at the procedures. Is a hard stop a wise idea? Did the police actually leave, say, a Chris Kaba in a situation where he's panicking and potentially trying to get out of a difficult situation in the same way which could be argued?
What do you make of that, Andrew? That the tactics involved here may, in fact, inflame an already extremely dangerous, potentially dangerous situation.
But if they think this vehicle was involved in a shooting the day before, their job as police officers is to protect the public first and foremost. So they want to stop this car to get whoever's in it. They need to get this car. So this is a very difficult decision for the police. And the people watching this are all going to be thinking, why did Chris Kaba not, if he had nothing to hide, done nothing wrong? Now, I know you're going to shout and holler and say, hang on, because you won't trust the police, but why didn't he get out the car? Did he have something to hide? Because I don't think if I was in that position, I would be using the car as a police using the car as a battering ram, battering police officers.
A lot of police officers who are trained and qualified to carry weapons handed them back in, didn't they? After this officer,
because they think, why would I ever do this job again?
Because they felt that they are taking on the responsibility of making these split-second decisions.
I disagree with the concept of split-second decision completely, by the way.
Do you?
I completely challenge
in this case or generally?
Thematically, across the board or so. I think that I often call it split-second propaganda, even also, because what we often find is that, again, so I point to this case of Reid, Hutchins. I'm sorry, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. If there was ever a glaring moment for a split-second decision to terminate potential threat, that was it. But we often find that these split-second decisions are often conducted against particular subsections of the actual... Don't get me wrong, we're lucky in this country that police are not trigger-happy. We don't have the American type of police force or so.
Oh, my God.
But where we are, what we are finding is that there's a disproportionate disproportionate element in which police are often using these, quote, split-second decisions against black men.
Miles, I challenge you on that, because, I'm sorry, there have to be situations where it is a split-second decision. I mean, for example, let's take another country, the south of France. Several years ago, with the lorry driver who was driving down the main thoroughfare in Nice and pulverising people, killing people. And there were two, and of course in France, most gendarmes carry sidearms as a matter of course, and they had a split-second decision to make, and they took it and they shot the guy through the windscreen.
And they were right to.
And stopped the carnage. Now, that, if ever there was a split-second decision, you've got an example of it there.
Rioters were about to set fire to a hotel.
Why don't you deal with that point?
Because I'm contextualising it with broader points too.
Fair enough,
Rioters were about to set fire to a hotel, in which and quite literally were doing everything they could to do so, as we saw over the course of the summer. Police were there, and police actually left the situation, and police retreated from the situation, so effectively leaving the rioters at a particular point to actually just, not to, I don't know what happened, but it just seemed like they were left to just get on with the situation over there. Now, again, there's a difference here. So the idea that the idea that there has to be that the split-second decision, or so, if we accept as it is, which I don't, it has to be fatal, is one that I must challenge, because there's many different ways of actually terminating a threat. Although, so you take the lorry driver, for example, you could have shot his wheels. Chris Kaba, you could have shot his wheels too. You could have shot his wheels too. You could have found a different way to actually do some things, or you could have fired a warning shot. But the idea that it always has to be that boom, the person's dead. We don't believe in capital punishment in this country.
You say it's always dead. How often is a police officer who uses his firearm, or she, kills someone? It is rare. So what I'm saying, they are making split-second decisions, and perhaps quite often they're not taking them out fatally. We don't know. Because what we would know is if there was people killed, we would know about that. So this is a rare event, what happened to Chris Kaba. It's a rare event because he made a split-second decision, and the jury decided, having considered it very carefully for 3 weeks after a 2-year investigation, he made a very loaded decision.
They backed him.
But he made the right one.
But I must also point out too, look, we respect the jury decision, but we didn't. But we also should have expected the jury decision, because the reality of the matter is that, look, if you put you're up against the state, it's the overwhelming. You're up against the state and somebody who, again, we've all been programmed and instilled in us to actually trust the police.
So you're challenging the jury decision now?
I'm not. I'm contextualising things.
I'm contextualising.
I do respect the jury decision, but I'm contextualising it, because again, if you go inside a situation like this, or so, look, there's a reason why David versus Goliath is a story for the ages or so. This was in a situation or so, Goliath is meant to win. So the state in this situation is effectively Goliath in the court system, because when you put a police officer on the stand against somebody with Chris Kaba's imagery or so, and the situation that actually happened, even if you put the police officer standing with Nels Abbey or so, or Kwasi Kwarteng, who I'm normally here with, or somebody else like this, you would find them in the same situation or so, that the weight of belief would be upon the actual police officer.
Can we bring it to the politics of the person as far as you're concerned? I presume you live in London?
I do, yes.
OK. Do you, as a result of the verdict yesterday, as a black man living in London, do you feel less safe?
I feel that there's a level of safeness in the way in which I conduct and carry myself. We're forced to conduct and carry ourselves throughout situations. Not that I feel less or more safe. It's just that it's a continuity of what we've seen in the past. That's just it, essentially. So look, whenever I've stopped and searched by the police, which sadly over the course of my lifetime has been far too many times for me to remember, or so.
Into double figures.
Oh, well into double figures. So we're significant into double figures. But this is not. I must be clear. This is not that unique an experience. This is the life. This is the black experience in Britain. But when I'm stopped and searched by police, as I was trained when I was quite little, was pointed out, you almost treat it like you're behind enemy lines. Name, rank, serial number. You just give the details, give them what they want, and get out of there, get home safely. That's the key thing. You don't want to walk away with injured, or you certainly don't want to walk away with a criminal record for no reason whatsoever.
Andrew, what is absolutely clear is that this has divided people.
Of course.
And you have a community who feel that justice wasn't done, and you have, on the other side, people who think this police officer should never have been charged, and that police are doing a very difficult job. And I don't know whose responsibility and how that is addressed now. I mean, we've got the Justice Secretary on this morning.
Yeah, look, it's very difficult to square the circle, but I think we have to have faith in the jury system, and I do. It's the best way, and the jury were unanimous, and it didn't take them very long, Susanna, 3 hours, and the police... Look, I get what...
It's
Neil's saying.
opened wounds,
it
hasn't
has,
it, for
and I'd say
people.
again, look, we saw Louise Casey's report very recently.
Yes.
20 years after the Macpherson report, saying the Metropolitan Police has introduced graces. There is a problem. I get that, but on this specific case, I think we have to. It's very sad for Chris Kaba's family, but look, he was using that car as a potentially lethal weapon, and that's why that police officer made that decision. And look, we expect those police officers, when they pull a gun, they're doing it to protect the public. And it's a difficult thing. And if they're now going to be prosecuted, why are they going to do that job?
Are you arguing that he shouldn't have been even brought to court in the first place?
Well, there's a case to say, should he have been named? If he then found guilty, of course you name him. But there's a case to say, should he... Because this man is a marked man now. He's been suspended for 2 years. Everybody knows his name. His picture will be everywhere. And is he now a marked man? And he's innocent, according to the courts.
Nels, how do you think this is... What's the way forward? How is the black community in London, which... And, you know, I'm not saying...
Sure.
There's one kind of monolith.
Of course, yeah.
But for those in the black community, for whom this has opened, you know, painful wounds about how they're treated, and for Chris Kaba's family and those campaigning for them, how do we move forward and make them feel like there is acknowledgement of what they're experiencing?
I think so. Police accountability is absolutely essential. Because accountability it breeds confidence, and there has to be a confidence system. The police have to go back and review their actual tactics in this. Was the hard stop the wisest idea in this situation? And I think they should be looking across the board at their tactics.
So what do you think they should have done then, given that they had identified the vehicle as being involved in a shooting? The day before. What would you? What
must be clear. The vehicle. So I've been again. So another experience again. I'm sure we've all been. We all live in London here. I believe most of us do anyway. I've woken up one day, went downstairs, saw a letter saying that my car had been towed away because I had 2 tickets, I had a pay ticket. I ran outside, literally in my boxer shorts in the snow, and I found my car sitting right there. And I thought, so what's going on? Suddenly, it turned out that somebody actually duplicated my number plate, so that has happened. Have you experienced it before? So that happens over here. So in terms of who's behind the wheel of the car, so the car could be, or the automatic number plate recognition could have been triggered, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's behind that actual wheel is the person there. But to answer your question very directly, we need to... The idea in which police should not be held accountable is one that we must push back against. There has to be accountability, and there has to be probe, and there has to be a very robust IOPC or police regulator that looks into this. That's not staffed almost exclusively by police officers or so. There has to be significantly more confidence in the decisions of the CPS, and CPS is not just in relation to this case. Actually, there's significantly more notorious cases that the CPS should be held accountable for.
I want to be devil's advocate here. Imagine they didn't do the hard stop and that car kept going and was then used in another shooting and was then potentially a fatal shooting. Imagine the outcry that the police weren't more robust. That's the decisions they have to take all the time, and it's why I'm very glad I'm not a police officer, because it's very difficult.
The overwhelming number of messages we're getting here from our viewers is that the problem was that he didn't surrender to the police, that he did use the car seemingly as a weapon. I mean, Grant on email says, it's very sad that Chris Kaba had to die. I feel the police had little choice but to shoot him. The lesson to learn is don't run from the police, especially if you're in a hard stop. He sends his sympathy to Kaba's family.
Sure.
And Susan says, surely if he'd stopped and done what the police asked of him and not tried to drive the car at them, then it wouldn't have happened. He should have done as he was asked and got out of the car. End of story. Your answer to that, Nels, is he was panicking because of the very nature of a hard stop, which you yourself
Well, fight or
experienced.
flight, yeah, but the nature of the hard stop is one thing or so, too. And also, too, if you're in a situation... Again, so I must be very clear. Who you are is a reflection and representation of who the type of policing you receive. So his experience of policing is very different to, say, the people who are emailing in. I must be pushed back on the idea that he had to die. He didn't have to die. In spite of there's many different ways to have dealt with the situation. So, look, I think it's a very, very tragic situation that we find ourselves in.
Okay.
But the key thing is, how do we move on and how do we make sure that we don't relapse into this sort of situation and we keep our society safe? And it has to boil back down to accountability.
Let's move on quickly before we have to get to the news at 7. We're going to go live right now to pictures in Australia, where in just the last few minutes, the King and the Queen have left the Sydney Opera House, and they're now, as we can see, greeting the crowds.
Can we see?
Yep.
Oh, they were here a few moments ago, so we've missed them greeting crowds, but luckily our cameraman was on it.
There's the Queen.
So there's the Queen outside the Opera House.
So they're still getting, you know, generally speaking, an extremely warm welcome down there, aren't they?
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Clearly, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good crowd, considering... And, look, it's going to be the King's... I've got to say again, this is the first visit to Australia by a British king.
And
It's
probably, as you said
extraordinary.
yesterday, his last.
It'll be his last.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
75. He's being treated for cancer.
Let's not be that morbid. I say I
Well,
suspect
look, I
China will
hope
be back
so.
down there.
An annual trip.
Yeah. Let's
It's a long way to go.
Yeah.
I think it's great that he's had such a good
All right.
medical turn.
Now, this police officer is not going to jail. He's been acquitted. He's been found not guilty. A lot of prisoners are in jail as we speak, but in a few hours' time will be coming out because another
This
1,000.
morning.
Can we please
Another
be
1,000 are being released.
spared the grotesque sight of them shaking up and down the fizzy wine or the Prosecco, whatever it was.
Saying they'll vote Labour for life.
Those scenes were just grotesque and stomach-churning for people.
Well, I think
and
the
we know that
question-
some of the people got out, Richard, were people who've been involved in domestic violence. They just didn't do their homework properly. I hope they've done it better this time.
So it's going to be drug dealers, fraudsters, burglars.
Drug
will be
dealers.
among more than 1,000 prisoners who were jailed for more than 5 years who are going to be freed early. Because there isn't one conviction, as in there isn't one sort of domestic violence conviction, because you're convicted of various other different degrees of assault, coercive control, other things, domestic abusers will be let out.
Yeah.
On a technicality, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we're going to be speaking to a lovely woman this morning who faces the fact that the person who assaulted her might be let out early.
It's 98% of the time it's going to be a woman, and they are going to be sickened with worry when they get the letter through the door
The
saying
anxiety.
he's being... I know, it's terrible.
I mean, if you
It's
were the
not
victim of domestic abuse, you'd feel anxious. If you were the victim of a burglary, you'd feel anxious. If the person who was
And the idea
responsible
that
for the
burglary
crime-
doesn't matter, it's a very, very stressful thing for people.
Agreed.
And a lot of burglars will just go back. And are these people who are being allowed out, have the probation service sorted them out? Have they got somewhere to go?
Well,
they got a home, they got a
judged on what
job,
happened
or
a
they're
few
going to go
weeks
straight
ago
back
when the
to
first
crime?
tranche came out. No. One, you had prisoners who were absolutely supposed to be tagged and weren't tagged.
That's
and you had others who, within hours of being released, had reoffended and were back inside again.
Shambles.
I think that... I completely agree regarding domestic violence victims, and you're
Horrible.
right. 98% of the time it will be women.
Yeah.
I don't think they should be released, and so I think they should serve their full term because, again, the problem is that it's a crime of. It's not a crime of. It's a crime. It's so interpersonal between the two that they'll probably go back and try to seek the person if you're not careful.
that's
And we
of
can't
course
risk that.
concern.
We can't risk that. That has something has to be done about that. That has to be brought into order. But I think more broadly, even the beloved drug dealers you spoke of, or so, I think that is an area where we can actually look at those sorts of people and figure out that not under the best of circumstances, but can we actually find a way to do something and make you a more productive person in society? So I personally wouldn't have, and I agree, I admire James Timpson, who's pretty much the brains behind all
prisons
this.
minister,
Absolutely, I completely admire his work and everything he's done. But I personally would have looked at this a little bit more thematically about behaviour outcomes too. That I think in the American system, they look at have you behaved in a way that suggests you've actually been rehabilitated, your behaviours at a particular level, That would be the basis of, that would be the key core basis of release,
The
as opposed to technical.
Andrew, I mean, Nels, you say they should, you know, some people should serve their full sentence. I think very rarely do people serve a full sentence.
No, they do half of that.
They do 50%, and currently in this case they're doing 40%.
I know.
But that's a behaviour incentivation, to incentivise them to behave well.
It's that whole idea when somebody gets a life sentence. No, it's not.
No, with a minimum.
A minimum. 20 years, which means 10.
Yeah.
And you know, we know what happened.
We all know that. We all make that calculation when we hear the sentence. Look, very quickly, we can go back to the land of Down Under. We've got some more live pictures of our king and queen. There they are, mingling with the crowd, still being welcomed in the warm summer sunshine now. Summer coming down under. The king looks very relaxed, isn't he?
A slightly easier morning for him this morning than yesterday morning.
About this time,
where he was heckled in the Parliament by the Indigenous Rights campaigner. There's a flash mob going on there.
Lots of selfies.
Taylor Swift would be proud of this crowd. This is a
this is better. This is better.
King Charles still got it. There we go. And a flash mob too. So there we go. Here we are.
Right.
It could be a bit more synchronised, but I'm not going to criticise. I could be a bit more synchronised.
They're doing very well. They've been rehearsing
I'm not going to over-criticise them.
They've rehearsed that for a long time now.
Well, maybe they should rehearse a bit more.
Nels and Andrew, thank you very much indeed.